As one of African states that have never been colonized, Ethiopia has long diplomatic tradition. Theodore II, who reigned in the mid-19th century, was the first modern Ethiopian leader to try to develop a foreign policy that transcended the whole region. Analysis of Ethiopia's foreign policy, both past and contemporary, suggests that rather than serving at the pawns of one superpower or another, Ethiopia's leaders consistently played their perceptions of what was best for Ethiopia before all else. Hello and welcome. I am Andnet Leo. Today on Messenger, Ethiopia's past, current, and future diplomatic trajectories will be discussed. And to do that, here I have invited Ambassador Teferra Shaul Kidanekal, Member Board of Trustees, Center for Dialogue Research and Cooperation, as well as Foreign Policy Advisory Council at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Ethiopia. Ambassador Teferra Shaul, thanks for joining me here on Messenger.
Thank you for having
me. Good. Let's proceed to the points of discussion we like to add in this interview session. So, Ambassador, let's begin our discussion with the West's attitude and their approach towards Ethiopia in different governments, particularly of the Dark region and the TPLF-dominated EPRDF and the current one.
Well, I think before we delve into the past three regimes, it would be good to go into a historical context. Ethiopia has had leaders whose primary objective has always been the preservation of its existence, the preservation of its national and traditional identity, and the preservation of its territorial integrity. This began before and after the pharaohs of Egypt. Then when Egypt was under Turkish colonialism or Turkish domination under the Pashas, Ethiopia has been playing a major role in terms of advancing diplomatic relations with its neighbors. The Sudan came only later, when it was an Anglo-Egyptian condominium. And the others, like Kenya, Tanzania, and so on, they achieved their independence in the 60s. So Ethiopia's tradition of relations begins with Emperor Theodorus, who was corresponding with Queen Victoria. And when Queen Victoria's emissary tried to dictate certain issues on the emperor, he said, I'm not the Raja of India, so don't try that. And that has been the attitude of Ethiopian rulers, Ethiopian administrators, Ethiopian leaders. In the last few years, especially in the advent of building the Renaissance Dam, major powers have been trying to intervene in Ethiopia's affairs and dictate the terms of how we manage our rivers, how we manage our own country. Not to speak about the Soviet times, the confrontation of the Cold War and Ethiopia's role. Ethiopia had leaders from A to Z who have always had the interest of their people and their country at heart. So in the last, as you mentioned, during the EPRDF during the emperors, it's very clear the emperor respect for Ethiopia. Ethiopia could interact with the fascists like Salazar, with the communists like Mao, with the Democrats like Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, and with royals like Queen Elizabeth and the kings before her, the kings and queens, and also with European potentates and rulers. This has put Ethiopia as a major global diplomatic player. Now, the fact that Ethiopia is building this Renaissance Dam has been an enigma for Egyptians who, for centuries, have always felt threatened, or rather, they used the notion of feeling threatened by propagating on their own people. The regime survival of Egypt has been always, they needed an enemy. First, it was Ethiopia, then Israel, and then again back Ethiopia. And they have been playing also as middlemen between the big powers like the United States and the Arab sheikhs. So they gained some popularity among Western leaders. But Ethiopia also had been playing its own role as a messenger of peace, founding the African Union, struggling for the independence of African states, it's their own independence, throwing out the Italians, and all this has given Ethiopia credibility as an independent state. Now, when this independent state started to mobilize its resources, natural resources and human resources, then the Egyptians felt again they were being marginalized, their importance was diminishing. So they had to find some reason to undermine Ethiopia. And our leaders may not tell you, but if it is, if there is a country that has been much engaged in trying to undermine Ethiopia, systematically, it has been Egypt or Britain, their master. Britain has been their colonial master. The Turks were their colonial masters, but the Turks are now our very good friends. And then consistently, Russia and China has been with us. And even America, the American people have no enmity towards the Ethiopian people. We know that. American regimes sought to advance their interest at that time, at the time when they were in power. Like when we interacted, or Ethiopia interacted with America after the Second World War, President Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower were foremost among those that saw Ethiopia as a credible partner. Then came the Kennedy, Nixon, and other administrations until Trump, who, for better or for worse, he misunderstood the historical context of American-Ethiopian relations. Now, when in the advent of Joe Biden's ascent to power, Ethiopia was much more willing, in particularly those in the diaspora, worked hard to get him elected. And for some reason, they had nurtured a certain kind of relationship with a part of our country, that is Tigray, when the Tigray Liberation Front was trying to overthrow the Derg. Then the personal relations turned into a spoiler of country-to-country relations. This is what has really transpired in the last few years. So the cardinal principles of Ethiopian foreign policy is maintain the good relations with friends, develop new partnerships, and work for peace in the world, for collective security, as well as for mutually beneficial economic advantages and development. This has been at the core of Ethiopian foreign policy. So the problems that ensue today are some of those problems can be resolved through dialogue. We have chosen dialogue. We have shown that we are a credible partner. Our soldiers shed their blood in Korea alongside with American soldiers, with Commonwealth soldiers, with others who were participating in the maintenance of world peace. In the Congo, we did the same thing. And later also, even during EPRDF's time, Ethiopian troops have been fighting against terrorism alongside others who shared the same view. Terrorism is homebred in some countries, it is international in others. In our case, terrorism has been homebred. How can you not call a group that kills its own national army? How can you not call a group that kills children, women, destroys schools, and others as terrorists? Because the terror has been perpetrated by this group, which seeks to regain central power at Arat Kilo and try to perpetrate the kind of mayhem and killing that we have seen in the past few years. Thankfully, the Ethiopian government has been very much patient in dealing with the issue, but patience runs out. The Ethiopian people also have their own way to express how to get rid of a problem. They have, the history of Ethiopia is replete with successful stories. Yes, success extracts a lot of sacrifice. From Mussolini's time up to today's time with the internal problems we are paying a lot of sacrifice. In the midst of all, it is the people. It is the innocent people who have nothing to do with power mongering that are suffering. So the foreign policy of Ethiopia today is strengthened also by the loud voices we have abroad, which we call the diaspora. Had it not been for the diaspora, a lot of things would have gone amiss. But the diaspora have been the bulwark of Ethiopia's independent existence. And they have joined their compatriots at home to advance the policy of maintaining Ethiopia's existence, the survival as a nation state. And this is something that we have to be proud of.
Right, good. Thank you very much for the clarification you made on the point of discussion I raised. And the next question is, what sort of weaknesses or what sort of success and failures had been there within the past 84 years? That means starting from the imperial regime to the current one. Could you specifically put those success and failures?
It's a very good question. We have to know the plus and minuses in our dealings with foreign relations. In the past 80 years, as you know, the Emperor of Ethiopia started at that time his relations with the European states as a crown prince. He went to Italy, to Europe, etc. And then at after the Second World War began, he had to measure his strength. And since he could not fight a modern army that was well armed, he had to flee the country, go to Geneva, appeal to the international community, the League of Nations, appeal to their conscience, and then reorganize his army at home, exile, and then he came through the Amhara region up to Addis Ababa to liberate Ethiopia. In this exercise, the British Commonwealth has been the support of Ethiopia, although Britain, during the time of Laval and Hoare, the French and the British foreign ministers who really wanted to sell out Ethiopia, Churchill, Anthony Eden, and others realized the importance of Ethiopia in this part of the world, and therefore Commonwealth troops stood by us, and the liberation was effected. Then we had, after the war, the Americans came in with special military and other assistance, and that went on very well, from Eisenhower up to Trump, I should say. And with this kind of relationship, the exodus of Ethiopians into America was increasing, and so we have a large diaspora community in America, in Europe, and elsewhere. So these are now those who fight alongside their compatriots at home for the very survival of Ethiopia when our survival was threatened. And this should be given credibility. Now, during the time of EPRDF, I should give credit to Mallas. He was a very articulate person in terms of expressing Ethiopia's or his regime's wishes. When the African Union was threatened with the removal of the headquarters from Addis Ababa to elsewhere, Mallas fought tooth and nail to preserve the headquarters here. And then also with the building of the Renaissance Dam, when the Americans or Trump tried to dictate terms on Ethiopia, it was Dr. Abiy who said, no, nobody should interfere in Ethiopia's affairs. The Ethiopian people themselves can and should decide. And this has been a contentious issue for so many years, because then, in the midst of all these foreign powers, including, I call a spade, the British, the Americans, and the Arabs, some of the Arab states, some of them are very close to us, tried to use the Nile as a bait for undermining Ethiopia. But then we filled the dam, we started generating electricity. So what are they going to do now? History is replete with the kind of Ethiopia's challenges and Ethiopia's successes. So this success will continue so long as we are determined to carry on the tradition of Ethiopia's past rulers to preserve the national, or rather the statehood existence that has been maintained so far.
Good. How do you see the diplomacy of the country in the current time, its strengths, the government's efforts, and its response from the outside world?
I cannot say it is without challenges. Obviously, when the current regime, the regime of change, came to Ethiopia, the first thing that Dr. Abiy did was to maintain very good relations with our neighbors, because unless you have a good environment, a good neighborhood, you cannot conduct world global politics and diplomacy while fire is raging on your borders. So what he did was maintain, or rather restore, good relations with Eritrea, good relations with the Sudan. We helped them establish a national government, which was a coalition. And then we helped also others like Somalia in terms of maintenance of peace, fighting against terrorism. So this has been a good start. And this very power, the fact that a leader of Ethiopia got a Nobel Prize for the work of peace he did, that did not go down well with our detractors. Let's be very frank. Abiy may have his weaknesses, but he has made his mark on the history of the world as having brought back two parts of a former Ethiopia together to work for peace as two independent entities, but cooperating on various issues. So I should give credit also to the player in this game, President Isaias, for work of Eritrea, and others who helped Dr. Abiy in his quest for peace. The quest for peace continues. There is this national dialogue which has been established, which is ongoing and very systematically advancing. I think it is every Ethiopian's obligation to help this advance further. And so the issues that face us today are issues which have been with us, but which we have been overcoming. And there is hope that given the understanding of the world, things will change for the better. Look, the Europeans are now engaged with Ukraine. The Americans are engaged with Ukraine. They don't fight Ukraine's war. They use proxies to fight that war. They supply weapons. So do our detractors also in this region. They supply weapons to rebels in Ethiopia. They try to minimize the importance of the central government, but with the tenacity and the wisdom of our leadership here, we are trying to learn from our weaknesses and advance further.
Good. While the country is on progress to rehabilitate itself from the ongoing or the near past war, there is this and misinformation from the outside world.
Well,
and how do you evaluate it with regard to the foreign diplomacy of the country?
War, the nature of war has changed in the year 2022. It is also cyber war. It is disinformation. It is war of communication. Are we doing well on that? Not yet. Not yet. We are not doing very well on that. We have to have articulate citizens articulating the cause of Ethiopia at every stage, at every forum. Thanks to the diaspora in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in Europe, they have been doing their best to augment, support the efforts of the work that is the effort that is being done at home. But war has a different dimension today, and we should not look at it in the same glasses that we looked at it 30, 40 years back. Disinformation, information, you have to have the upper hand in information. Whether you pay for it or you work for it, you better get the upper hand. That is important.
Okay, good. And who do you think that fabricates the false narratives about Ethiopia, and why do they fabricate it?
Let me tell you one example. For instance, there was an item where Ethiopian government admitted that there were certain atrocities committed by some soldiers in northern Ethiopia. It was very well articulated, disseminated, but then the BBC, when it took that piece, it twisted it to mean that Ethiopia was the central government was the only one that was committing atrocities. So twisting the truth is also part of the nature of Western media. They would not, if they think that there is a group that would serve their purpose, that would say, yes, sir, like a colonial slave, they would support the cause of that particular group. If they don't, they will kill you with their information. But then you have to be strong, not to die with misinformation, with their disinformation, and with the lobbyists that employ and unleash against your very existence.
Good. Here I want you to add some as a message for the diaspora or any other group or any other individual in order to fight these false narratives against the nation. What would be your message?
My message would be, as an Ethiopian, to my brothers and sisters, to my compatriots at home and abroad, to Ethiopians and former Ethiopians, that we should keep on the fight for truth, for justice. We should keep on the relentless fight for truth, and our truth will prevail, and the narrative that comes otherwise in a different form will be defeated. We have to be determined to overcome the narrative of some of our detractors and support our own regime, our own governments. If our government is weak in that, we have to tell our government, you better keep your momentum, you could better shape up, deploy better and articulate diplomats as you do now, and see how we can maintain the integrity, territorial integrity, the readiness to work with willing partners, world development, world peace, and fight against terrorism. All this will be successful only when we keep on the fight.
Good. With regard to our country's diplomacy, what should it look like in the post-war reconstruction and rehabilitation efforts?
Well, you see, any diplomatic effort is what you make it through your efforts at home. Are we responding to the needs of our populations here? That reflects also on your foreign policy. Are we responding to the yearning of peace of our people? That will reflect on your foreign policy. If the people have been enabled to work for peace like we do with the national dialogue and other efforts through religious institutions, through private institutions, through civil society, then the success will be not far.
Okay, the last but not the least, in the way forward, what sort of diplomatic approach the nation should adhere to? It might be a little bit similar to the question I raised previously.
You see, I think I told you earlier, when the Emperor of Ethiopia could speak to fascists, to communists, to Democrats, to everyone alike, we should be also, in this day and age, we should be able to face the music and take the bull by the horn, as they say. If someone comes as an enemy, engage them. We have to engage them. If we can't engage them directly, engage them through those we believe can reach them. There is also a backdoor diplomacy. There is also a quiet diplomacy. There is also a diplomacy that articulates the wishes of the ordinary people. And then, of course, tourism, open your country to tourism, to other visits, to interaction, to inter-academic exchange. All this would help diplomatic efforts. Diplomacy is not something that you wish and just get it like that. You have to work for it. And then the other thing is, those who are engaged in diplomacy should have the passion to work in that field. If someone is engaged in trying to wave the flag and wine and dine with foreign leaders, that's fine, but it doesn't help further. But you have to have the passion. You have to have love for your country. Not only as a mercenary, you should not work as a mercenary, but as a visionary who is dedicated to the welfare and cause and advancement of your own people.
Ambassador Tafarra Shaul Kidana Akal, member of Board of Trustees, Center for Dialogue Research and Cooperation, as well as Foreign Policy Advisory Council at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ethiopia. Thank you very much for the clarification you gave me on the points of discussion we raised so far.
I thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak my mind.
Thank you very much. Have a good time.